Hey everybody, it's your favorite 80s enthusiast and reviewer, 80s child, aka You Brought Me Home. I know that I've been gone from internet for a while. I know that I said I was going to finish reviewing all of the Suits first half of season 8, and I had to stop at season 5 because of some unforeseen circumstances having to do with the computer. So I will eventually go back and redo those and finish up those last. But while I have the opportunity to do this by phone, I wanted to do another review that I promised earlier that I was going to do. And yeah, this one is not easy for me to do. But here goes anyway. This is my Charmed Reboot 2018 season premiere, season 1, episode 1 review. Now, before we even get into the review portion, I want to explain my relationship with Charmed so that you guys don't have some preconceived notion of, oh, well, she's an old Charmed fan, so naturally she's going to hate anything new. Because when I walked into this, after I heard it was being rebooted, both times, and then saw the trailer drop, and now this premiere episode, I really, really, really tried to have as much open mind as I could. Despite my misgivings in the trailer, I really wanted to walk into this with an open mind and an open heart and kind of just let the chips fall and see how things would turn out. I really wanted to give the actresses as much leverage as I could to do what they could with the characters. And I also walked into this knowing that this is the pilot, and it's most of the time when a new show starts out, it takes time for the show to find its footing, for all the plot pieces to fall into place, for the character development to start smoothing out. You can't expect lightning to strike in a first episode. That does not happen. I mean, it's rare, extremely rare, so you can't expect the first episode to be perfect. And I knew that this was not going to be, the Charmed that I remembered from my college years. I wasn't expecting it to be, but I was expecting it to follow some certain rules for the show to make sense. And unfortunately, it didn't even get that far. No, back to what I was saying before. My relationship with Charmed. Charmed is a series that originally aired between 1998 and 2005. For 8 years, or 2006, sorry. On what was then, it wasn't the WB back then, or it wasn't the CW back then, it was the WB before. Actually, I think it was the UPN before they merged with WB, and the WB merged with CW. Lots of different network changes, but anyway, that just dates me and tells you how old I really am. This show came out when I was in college, and I won't say that I was like uber super duper, oh my god, fandom, writing fanfiction, blah blah blah, because I was in college and I really didn't have the time, and I wasn't as involved in fandom as I am now. And you have to remember, this was the late 90s, early 2000s, and we didn't have all the like Tumblr, Twitter, Instagram, blah blah blah. We had user groups and Yahoo groups and Geo cities and people individually making up their own message boards and things like that. So the fandom wasn't as pervasive as it is now. It did definitely exist. It was definitely fan fiction and art and things, but it wasn't as insane as it is now. Because of all the proliferation of social things. So, sorry, I'm having to balance the phone. Anyhow, so I definitely watched all 8 seasons. There was a point where I missed a little bit because I was in the Navy for 4 years and we were deployed for a little while. So this was right around the time when Piper was having Wyatt. So there was a little bit that I missed, and because we didn't have access to TV overseas, I had to wait till I came back to catch up. But eventually I did watch them all, so I have seen them. And I was a big fan. I mean, I adored the show. It was in the same vein as Buffy and all those typical type of shows I used to watch back then. And I was around for the whole crazy Prue versus Paige crisis at the end of season 3. I remember how the internet, as small as it was back then, blew up because, oh my God, Shannon Doherty's leaving. Who could ever replace Prue Halliwell? So yeah, I know all the rules about witchcraft. I know everything that has to do with the show and how the rules work. That being said, I walked into this pilot. I just want to say, I'm not trying to compare this show to the original Charm, because there is no comparison. There will never ever be. There is no reboot that will ever touch what Charmed was. I commend the writers and producers and actresses for trying to bring or breathe fresh life into the show. I feel like it was a little too soon, because realistically the show ended. Yes, it premiered in 98, which was 20 years ago now, but the show went on for 8 years and ended in 2006. That was only 12 years ago. Generally, when you reboot a show, you usually wait a little longer for the nostalgia to be there. And the nostalgia for it wasn't quite there yet. I mean, there is a lot of people that were happy to see a reboot of Charmed, and I'm all for that. But I wanted to see a reboot that paid respect to everything that the old show brought to the table. I mean, I didn't want to get into the feminist aspect of this, but it's kind of hard not to, considering everything that was in the pilot, which I will get to. I know there was this big controversy about, you're trying to say that the original show wasn't feminist enough. You have to understand that Charmed was a product of its time. And if you watch it, it still does stand up. Granted, things for women have definitely changed in the last 20 years. So their idea of feminism and how it was portrayed is very different than has evolved since. Now, you have to realize the dynamics of Charmed and a lot of the changes that went on. I am not saying that Charmed did not have its fair share of problems. All shows do. And trust me, there were a lot of areas where Charmed was problematic. Holy shit, were there a lot of areas where Charmed is problematic. If you go on YouTube and you listen to anybody who's ever been a fan of Charmed and has reviewed this show, as much as they sing its praises, they can also tell you there was a lot of areas that was fucked up. I'm not even going to mention the whole storyline between Phoebe and Cole, because I would take a whole other video to even go through. But you have to understand how the dynamics in the show changed. The first 4 seasons of the show was run by Constance Burge. And you can tell the difference between when she was there and when she was not, with how the actresses dressed, and quite a bit in how they acted and how they approached things. Because in the first 4 seasons, it was about the sisterhood, about them learning their witchcraft and coming together as a family, and that strength as women, as sisters, as witches. The onus wasn't so much put on their relationships and on how skimpy they could dress and all this other stuff. And that in itself made it a very strong show. When Constance Burge left and the Brad Kern became the new executive producer of the show, everything changed. The focus was more on how many skimpy dresses or outfits or tight outfits can we put the girls in, especially Phoebe. How many relationships can they have this year? How many, demons or warlocks are they going to date this time? And it strayed quite a bit from where it should have gone. So that gives you a little background into the fact that, yes, Charmed was a great show, but it also had its downsides. That being said, the new reboot, I really wanted to be able to say positive things about this. I really, really did. Honest to God, I sat there and I watched the whole thing through. And I even watched, they re-aired the pilot, I think last night. I tried to watch it again, but I was like, I cannot force myself to watch this twice. The only positive in this entire episode was the actress Valerie Cruz. First, I will give you the rundown of the overall plot. It's somewhat similar to the original Charmed. Valerie Cruz plays Marisol Vera. She is the mother of these three girls. The three girls are as follows. We have Madeline Mantock, who plays oldest daughter Macy Vaughn. Melanie Diaz, who plays middle daughter Mel Vera, although there are some websites that have her listed as Mel Pruitt. I think there might have been some changes going on, or maybe she has a slash name or what. There's also been some websites that have said that all three girls have different fathers. I don't know, because they've never said anything about the girl's father. I don't know. And Sarah Jeffrey, who plays youngest daughter Maggie Vera. Show also stars Rupert Evans as their white lighter, Harry Greenwood, who's also the head of the Women's Studies Department, where Maggie goes to college. He takes over for Marisol, who was the previous Women's Studies Department chair after she's murdered. Sedarius Blaine, who plays Galvin Burdett, he's Macy's boyfriend. Charles Gillespie plays Brian. He's Maggie's old boyfriend from high school, and he's the one that supposedly is possessed by a demon or something. Ellen Tamaki plays Detective Nico Hamada. She is Mel's girlfriend, the middle daughter. She's also a police detective, or I should say ex-girlfriend at the time of the show. And Brendan Zub plays Detective Trick Bailey. I believe that he's Nico's partner. Okay. So, here's the things that we already know. The show has to do with three sisters who find out after their mother's death that they are witches, and that their mother was murdered by an unknown source. And I'm guessing that the big overall plot of the first season is them trying to figure out who murdered their mother. I will give a positive for that, because there was a point in the pilot where I was afraid that they were going to just figure out who their mother's murderer was really quick and tie that shit up with a bow and boom, gone. And that pissed me off for reasons which I will explain. So in the pilot, Maggie is a freshman in college. She is trying to rush a sorority, and she is desperate to be accepted by these girls, to the point where she does not want to deal with her sister and all of her sister's baggage. Her sister is a teaching assistant and a graduate student at the same college in the Women's Studies Department. And she is very, violently anti-man. I don't know if the show was written to be this way or not, but it is not a positive. Now, I am saying this with the codicil that I'm a female, and I'm not saying I'm anti-feminist at all. I'm definitely a feminist. But I am also pro-man, pro-human being. It's one thing to dislike a man who sexually assaults somebody or who tries to exhibit a control over someone. Yes, that's bad. But to just hate men for the simple idea of hating them just because they're men, kind of ridiculous and really awful. There are so many scenes in the pilot where they react to men in such a horrible way simply for the fact that they're men. These men did not do anything wrong to deserve the reactions that they got from these girls, but they got the reactions anyway simply for being male, and it's really fucking ridiculous. Madeline Mantock plays Macy Vaughn. She's the oldest sister. She's a scientist. She also works at the same college in molecular biology, if I remember correctly. She's moved there from another town. The town itself is called Hilltown, but the college students call it Helltown. So I guess it's a college town. She was given, out of the blue, she was given this job and brought to Hilltown, which we find out later on was actually orchestrated by their mother to get her there. And while she's there, she walks by with her boyfriend. She walks by her mother's house, and she realizes that that's the house from the picture she has of herself being held as a baby by her mother. She feels like she wants to go into the house, but she's not sure if she should, because she doesn't know if, well, she can't be certain if that is their house or if their mother just, or if her mother just happened to take a picture while she was standing outside of a house. And she doesn't want to make that kind of mistake. She doesn't feel comfortable yet doing this, but she really does want to find out more about her family. So that's the lowdown on the three. The middle daughter, as I said before, is a lesbian, but they don't quite play it off well because they kind of use her lesbianness as like, not as an oddity, but as like a character stereotype. They portray Mel as, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form blaming the actresses. They can only go off of what they're given. But her portrayal is very anti-man. I hesitate to say feminazi because I don't like to brand anybody with that as that type of term, because it really is a disgusting term. But there are quite a few scenes where she is interacting with men at the college and she gets violent with them for no reason other than the fact that they're men. So before we get into the plot points, let's just start at the beginning. So as the episode opens up, the girls are about to go their separate ways. Mel's going on a date with Nico, and Maggie is going to the sorority house to Rush. Their mother is trying to talk to them because she wants them to remain strong and remember that their sisterhood is the most important part of them. And from that, you know that something is happening, because she wouldn't have been as serious as she was without a reason behind it. So you know that something serious is going on that she's not really talking about yet. I will give major props to Valerie Cruz. I have been a fan of Valerie Cruz for a while. I remember her from True Blood. She played a vampire sheriff there. Even before that, I first discovered her in Dresden Files like a decade ago. And she, it was a short-lived series on the Sci-Fi Channel, and she played Karen Murphy on the Dresden Files. She's amazing. I love her. So I was very glad to see her in this. And there's a lot of videos where I've seen people are pissed off saying, oh my God, the mother's white. No, she's not. Valerie Cruz is definitely not white. She's Hispanic. Just putting it out there. I know there's been a lot of controversy about whether or not these girls are Hispanic because it was marketed as being a show with Hispanic women. I know only one of the actresses playing the sister actually is. That's the middle daughter actress is Hispanic. The other two are African American, Caribbean, sort of. That is not a discussion I particularly feel comfortable about making, because as you can see, I am not Hispanic. So I'm gonna let that one lie. I know that at the very least it was probably not a good idea for the network to market this as a Hispanic-led show when it wasn't entirely true. They could have just used a blanket term, women of color, and that would have worked a hell of a lot better, because that wouldn't have been a lie, or it wouldn't have been a stretching of the truth. There are quite a few people of color in this. Macy's boyfriend is black. Mel's girlfriend is Japanese. So I do give them props for being diverse. But I don't like the feeling that the sister was made a lesbian just as like a token, so that, oh, we have to have a gay character in here to make it all inclusive, so just make one of the sisters gay. That's kind of what it felt like, because that's the way that they were. That's kind of the way she was portrayed. And anyway, so the girls leave, and the mother, before they left, the mother was arguing on the phone with someone at the college because she was involved in a dispute with another professor whom she had suspended for sexual misconduct. and the man was appealing, the professor was appealing this decision. There was going to be all kinds of marches about it, and I know it's very indicative of what's going on in our culture right now with the Me Too movement. But this is one of the big negatives I had about this episode. I am, like I said, I am all for feminism. I fully support the Me Too movement. Absolutely. I fully support, rallies at colleges to protest the fact that victims, both female and male, are not treated with the respect that they deserve. But in this series, at the rally, protesting his reinstatement, because that's why their mother was so upset, was that he was reinstated. All the women are protesting just men in general. They're protesting the fact that he was reinstated, and they're hating on men in general. Because there's a group of men that were at the rally holding signs, #NotAllMen, because they want people to understand that not all men are like that, which is true. Not all men are evil bastards. But the women there that were protesting were, the men and the women were both fighting. Punches were thrown. It was pretty nasty. And there was really no reason for it to get that violent. These men were exercising their First Amendment rights just as the women were. And the men weren't going after the women. The men weren't punching the women. But simply because one of the protesters made an off-color remark about... actually, it wasn't even an off-color remark. He pretty much... It was just a stating of the facts that, he was suspended. He appealed the decision. They investigated. They found the suspension wasn't right. They sent him back to work. And the guy said he felt that her mother was making a mountain out of a molehill, and she went nuts. Well, not nuts, but she went off on him and punched him in the face. For no real reason other than, I will say that Mel is probably harboring a lot of misplaced anger. She's very likely she's taking her frustration about her mother's death out on this guy. I understand that. I know some people were upset with her being violent, but you have to understand her frame of mind too. I get that. So the girls leave that night. The mother gets off the phone, and then she goes upstairs to the attic. Now, the attic doesn't exactly look like the original Charmed attic. I wasn't expecting it to. It has the stained glass window. And the mother starts casting a spell. I don't know what the fuck the spell was, because she was casting it in Latin, which I don't mind. But in order for a little more clarification to have been there, I would have preferred that the Book of Shadows was open and we could at least see the page, which would have written on it the title of the spell, so that we could at least know what she was doing. Because we didn't really know what the spell was. And the other thing was, the big issue that I had with the show is that nothing felt organic. In the pilot episode, which I have since rewatched moons ago, even before the girls realized that they were witches, there was little instances throughout the pilot where certain things happened that told the audience that this was a magical story, that there was magic involved, that there was fantasy involved, and there was an overall aura of magic throughout that house. In this episode, in this reboot, you don't feel that. So when you see the mother go from arguing on the phone about this professor, then going upstairs and casting a spell, you don't understand why. And her casting his magic feels so out of place, because there's no instances, no hints, no nothing that they have any sort of magical anything involved in their family. It just feels like in the original show it was witches who happened to be sisters, This show, it's sisters. No, sorry. I got that backwards. In the original show, it was sisters first who happened to be witches. This one feels like witches who just happen to be sisters. And their chemistry is just not there. Neither is there any feeling of magic or fantasy pervading through this house. As a matter of fact, when she casts a spell, that is the one and only time you actually, other than what happens at the very end, with them vanquishing that demon, it's the only instance of magic you see, other than what happens at the party and at the very end. And this, what Harry does, but it just does not feel natural within the show. I could chalk that up to the show is still trying to find its feet, but when you're talking about sisters, and the first thing that the mother says is that your strength comes from your sisterhood, they don't feel very strong. Like the very first scene you see them in together after they talk with their mother is they're going separate ways. And I know that in the original pilot, the three sisters were not entirely that close either. Yes, Prue and Piper lived together, but they only did so because their grandmother had passed away and they didn't want to lose the house. In reality, the two of them had very separate lives. Prue worked at the auction house, Piper worked at the restaurant. They were still close, but they didn't live together. And of course, Phoebe lived across the country. So there's that problem. It doesn't feel natural or organic in any way, and it doesn't really feel like magic belongs there. It feels like it's just thrown in and doesn't make much sense for being there. I do agree with what some other people have been saying, that if they wanted to market this as a Hispanic or Latinx-led show, that they could have tinkered with the witchcraft a little and make it not Eastern Europe, like European style Melinda Warren type witchcraft. They could have made it brujeria, which would have been really good because that makes sense with their ethnic background, and it would add so much more depth to the witchcraft and the magic, and would give them a whole new set of things to learn. So they go their separate ways. One daughter, Maggie, is at the sorority rushing. The other one is at her girlfriend's house getting her nookie on. And they get a text. Problem number one. This right here, text box on screen? No, wrong. Please get rid of. Not necessary. I do not need to see what is on the person's phone. This is another issue of telling versus showing. I don't need to be told what's on her phone. I don't care what's on her phone. If you want the drama to come across that their mother's in trouble, show it in the girls. Show it in the actions of the sisters. Show it in the emotion on their face. Show it in how quickly they run out of the respective places that they're at to get to their mother. That's dramatic acting, not a square box on a screen. The only time something like that is acceptable is in a case such as like Sherlock. The only reason that they had his text messages come up on the screen is because it relates to how his mind works. And the texting moves around and adjusts according to how his mind manipulates things and how he thinks, because it's very central to his character. There is a reason and a purpose behind that being on the screen, not just so you can see what she's texting. No one gives a fuck about what's on her fucking phone. Period. Doing that for no reason is pretty much only to appeal to the millennial crowd. That and the proliferation of the mentions of Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, what have you, that pervade. And I know what y'all are gonna say. Oh, you're just saying that because you're older and you're not into that stuff. Hey, I have Twitter. Okay, I have Tumblr. I'm not that old. I even have Facebook. I don't use it much, but I have it. um, I don't mind social media being in a television show, but it needs to have a purpose, and it needs to be used properly and within context. This show just throws it in there just so that the millennials will have something to hold on to. But it's not used properly. It feels out of place, jarring, and out of context. The biggest representation of this is the scene in the attic where, after the girls get their powers, Harry kidnaps them all and brings them back to their house into the attic and ties them to chairs to explain to them that they're the charmed ones. He mentions, if you have any questions or any concerns or you need me, you can call my name or you can GM me on, on the Twitter, on Snapchat. And I'm like, what? What? You're a white lighter. I mean, I know that he has a human job. He's the head of the women's studies, so it's not above him to have access to social media, but it doesn't make sense because he's a fucking white lighter. They're like up here. Leo had the tools to be a handyman, but he wasn't entirely up on modern like stuff because he goes from charge to charge to charge and doesn't really worry about what's going on in the modern world. So a lot of the time Piper had to, I mean, he got used to pretty quick when he was living with Piper, but he didn't have all the things that everybody else had at that time. All the technology and things, because that was not necessary for them. What the hell are you going to use a cell phone for if you're up in heaven or wherever the hell the white lighters are? That would make it, the idea that the women's studies job is his only profession is stupid. I have no problem with him having that there in order to watch over the three of them, but they're not his only charges, I would assume, because the charmed ones were not Leo's only charges. He was often called away taking care of other charges in the role of handyman. So you can't be a women's studies professor everywhere you go. It would have made more sense if they had him in a more unassuming profession. And here's another problem. It would have served them so much better if they did not know who he was at first. That if he was there on the periphery, I'm not necessarily saying he had to be a handyman like Leo. If they want to keep him as the women's studies, that's fine. That's a pretty good, easy way to watch over them. But he didn't necessarily have to present himself outright. One of the biggest fallacies, or one of the biggest failures of this reboot, is that they didn't allow the sisters to come together organically. In the original series, the entire pilot was about them not just finding out that they were witches, but coming together as sisters in a very organic way. They figured out on their own that they were witches. Phoebe found the spirit board, Phoebe and Piper. They realized that the pointer was moving on its own, and then they went up, and Phoebe was the one that found the book. Phoebe did the reading, and Phoebe brought the sisters together. Because Phoebe was the one that got her powers, one of the ones that got it first, by getting the vision of the children on the skateboards getting run over. And that's how she managed to bring the sisters together. In this reboot, it doesn't happen like that. Their mother dies. She's performing a spell. She's murdered. They come home when they know that she's in trouble. They find her body on the ground outside the house. 3 months later, the case is still not solved. It's still cold. The middle sister, Mel, is having a very hard time accepting it. She's angry. She's frustrated, and she's taking it out on pretty much every fucking body. Her relationship with her girlfriend has soured to the point where they're not even together. Nico had to break up with her because she was so focused on what happened with her mother, I guess, that her girlfriend got left behind, of sorts. I had no problem with the girlfriend. The only issue is that I felt she was a little young for the role. At first, I thought that they were trying to do a whole, they were trying to make her like Andy, because in the original series, the girls grew up with their next door neighbor Andy, and he saw them do magic, but Grams always took the memories away so he would never know. But some part of that stayed with him because he was always, as a cop, investigating paranormal occurrences, and eventually in season 1 he did find out. But she was still in love with him, and they got back together for a while, and yeah. So I thought that Nico was taking that particular role, but I'm not entirely sure, because Nico has kind of left the investigation behind, and she didn't care to revisit it anymore. They chalked it up to suicide. They thought that the mother had been, because the mother had one glass of wine, apparently that makes her so drunk she's going to fall out the window. Do you know how much force it takes to shatter a thick stained glass window of that size? I don't think her throwing herself out of it would have worked. She would have probably more likely gotten cut up and bled to death on the floor in the attic before she would have had the strength to throw herself out the window and shatter it. Just saying. I don't know if if Nico's presence is going to escalate, if she's going to find out later on. I don't know. It seems like at this point they're trying to keep all that secret, except for Macy, apparently. The other issue I have is the way that the powers were revealed. Apparently, according to Harry, what the spell that the mother was doing was to unlock their powers, because she had bound them when they were children so they could live a normal life. I don't know why she chose that moment to unbind their powers. That is not made apparent and doesn't make much sense. There's a whole lot that's not made apparent. Why she unbound their powers, where their magic comes from, who is the head of their line, because I definitely know it's not Melinda fucking Warren. That's not possible. It's a cute Easter egg that her page is in the book, but if she's there just as a really famous witch, that's one thing, but there's no way that she could be the head of their line. It's just not possible. There's no explanation as to why Macy was given up as a child. She just shows up out of the blue and automatically, I mean, yes, the first meeting goes kind of haywire because Mel is still pissed off, but automatically, like, boom, after the second time, they just automatically accept her. It's not organic. It does not feel natural. I remember in season 3, the end of season 3, and the beginning of season 4, when Prue was murdered. Piper and Phoebe were a mess, especially Piper. And when Paige came along, it took weeks and many episodes into season 4 before Piper was fully able to accept her as a sister. It took even longer than that for Paige to agree to actually move into the house. She was adamant on having her own life and living in her own apartment. So it took time for for the three of them to feel comfortable enough as a family for them to ask her to move in. And even when she did, she had a hard time kind of finding her place there. I mean, they did a whole episode about Piper and Phoebe and not being able to, or at least Piper not being able to come to terms with Prue's death. And it was a very natural progression of dealing with grief and acceptance of another sibling. And the other thing about Paige coming in is it made sense because it was already established back in season 2, if I remember right, when they confronted the demon that killed their mother, that their mother had had an affair with her white lighter. So there was precedent for them having a fourth sister, because you have Sam. With Macy, it makes no sense. because you don't know who the father is. You don't know why she would give up her kids, because she seemed to love her two daughters very much. So it doesn't make sense why she would give up Macy for no apparent reason, unless she was very young when she had her. I don't know. There's a lot of plot points that are very shady and very not developed. We don't know who the girls' father is. We don't know if Macy has a different father than them, because they don't look very much alike. I know a lot of people say, oh, but they do look alike. The two younger ones do, but still, we don't know if the three of them have three different fathers. We don't know if they have two different fathers, all the same father. No fucking clue. I don't know if this is ever going to be brought up. I don't know if they have any other members of their family that's magical, like a grandmother or grandfather or what. I know that the show is probably going to need more time to establish this, but it would have been much better if they had at least had some kind of touchstone, because they don't even have their mother at this point. At least in the original series, the mother had been gone for a long time, and her death had profoundly affected them. Profoundly. Even Paige, who had never even met her, it had a profound effect on all four of them. And the episode in which they finally confront her, the demon that murdered her, was one of the strongest and most profound episodes that they had done in their 8 years. It took so much out of all of them, especially Prue, to confront that demon and finally take it down. And then when Phoebe had to get that vision of how her mother died, I mean, it affected them all in so many ways, and it really did bring them together as sisters. Their mother's death in this episode, we can't really connect with the mother because we only see her in the first 5-10 minutes of the show, and then she's dead. You know, all props to Valerie Cruz. Love her, but we don't get to see much, or we don't get to have too much of an emotional connection with her. And quite honestly, their reaction to her death, it's 3 months later, and Mel is angry, which is much more of a believable reaction, whereas Maggie just kind of wants to put it out of her mind. Now, you realize later on that she's actually keeping a lot inside, but you don't even see any cracks until she finally comes out with the truth that, you know, she'd been blaming herself the entire time. But emotionally, you don't see that. When Prue died, Piper was a mess for months. And even after Paige showed up, it still took her time to deal with it. And she still had her days that weren't always great. I mean, she almost fell victim to the Furies because of her anger at Prue for leaving them. And the only reason that Phoebe was able to stand up the way she was because she was trying to be strong for Piper and for everybody else. But really, at a point, she did break when she just couldn't take it anymore. But neither of these two girls seems to... It just doesn't work.